Slideshows have long served as a compelling way to share a series of images with an audience, whether that audience consists of only one person or a huge group of people in a large auditorium. Lightroom makes it easy to share your images as a slideshow presentation, and in this lesson we'll explore the various options that allow you to customize a slideshow to your liking. I'd like to create a slideshow that features a series of images I captured while in Paris. In this case, I've already filtered the images so that the film strip only contains the images I'd like to include in the slideshow. However, I highly recommend when creating a slideshow that you save the images in a collection specific to that slideshow to help ensure you'll be able to get back to the exact same images later should you have worked on other images in the meantime. So I'll press Ctrl-A on Windows or Command-A on the Macintosh to select all of the images on the film strip, and then on the left panel in the Library module, I'll scroll down to Collections and click the plus button to add a new collection. Choosing the Create Collection option from the pop-up, the Create Collection dialog box will appear, and I can type a new name for this collection of images. In this case, I'll call it Paris Slideshow, which obviously relates directly to the reason I've created this collection in the first place. Clicking Create will cause that collection to be created, and as you can see, it now appears in the Collections pane on the left panel in the Library module. With my collection created, I can now switch to the Slideshow module to begin the task of creating a slideshow that consists of these particular images. You'll notice, by the way, that the left panel in the Slideshow module includes the Collections pane, making it very easy to select our particular collection for the images we want to include in the slideshow we're working on right now. I'm going to scroll up on the left panel so that we can see the various templates that are available for our slideshows. As you mouse over any of the templates on the left panel, you'll notice that the preview area shows us a preview of what that slideshow will look like. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult to get a true sense of the slideshow with a static preview image, but it does give you a sense of the overall layout. I'm going to go ahead and use the caption and rating template that's included with Lightroom, in large part because it happens to be one that makes it easy for you to see the variety of options that are available for laying out your slideshow. At this point, I'm ready to fine-tune the settings for my slideshow. That means I really don't need to view the left panel, nor do I need the module picker or the film strip. So I'll press Shift-Tab to hide all of the panels, and then simply click on the stub for the right panel to make only that panel visible. Notice, by the way, that we still have the toolbar underneath the preview area. We can use this to play or stop the slideshow, or to move among the images that are contained within this slideshow. It's worth noting, by the way, that we have a pop-up that allows us to choose whether we want to be working with all of the photos that appear on the film strip, or only selected photos or flagged photos. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, I recommend creating a collection that contains only the images you're using in this slideshow, which means you can simply use the All Film Strip Photos option. The first pane of the right panel in the Slideshow module is Options. Here you'll find settings related to the overall appearance or presentation of your images. The Zoom to Fill Frame option will cause the image to be zoomed so that it fills the entire frame of the slideshow area. In the case of vertical images in particular, that means a fair amount of your image may be cut off, as you can see here. You do have the option to drag the image around within this frame to specify which area of the image you'd like to be visible in the slideshow presentation. You'll need to do this for each of the individual images in your slideshow. In this case, I'm going to leave the option turned off so that we can see the entirety of all of the images. The stroke border option places a border around the outside edge of the image. This can be helpful for delineating the edges of images when the colors contained within those images blend in with your background. With this option turned on, you can click the color swatch to choose a color that you'd like to use for that stroke, and you can also specify a width or size for the stroke. Cast shadow, as the name implies, causes a drop shadow to be cast outside of the image area. Keep in mind that this drop shadow will only be visible if you're using a background color other than black. With black, it'll simply blend into the surroundings. You can adjust the opacity, the offset, in other words, the distance from the image, the radius or size of the blending, as well as the angle of the light. At first glance, you might assume the layout pane only relates to the appearance of guides in the slideshow preview area, but it actually relates to how large the images appear within the final slideshow presentation. With show guides turned off, the guides are still taking effect, causing the size of the image to be adjusted as needed. You simply can't see the lines. I prefer to have show guides turned on when I'm adjusting the settings for the guides, but then I like to turn them off so I'm not distracted by their display. With the Link All option turned on, when you adjust any one of the guides, all of them will adjust to the same degree. If you prefer, you can also adjust these guides independent of each other. For example, I can turn off Link All and adjust each of these guides individually. This will affect the size and position of the images in the slideshow. I can also link individual guides. For example, I can link the top and bottom guides so that both of those will adjust in concert with each other without affecting the left or right guides. In this case, I'm going to leave all of them linked and adjust it so that the image is relatively large in the frame. I'll scroll down now on the right panel so that we can see the Overlays pane. This is where you'll find settings related to the ability to overlay information onto your slideshow. For example, we can place the identity plate onto the slideshow presentation. Once you've turned this option on, you can click on the preview area to choose which identity plate you'd like to use, or you can edit the identity plate to bring up the identity plate editor and make adjustments here as desired. For example, I might like to include the word Paris as part of the slideshow presentation to remind viewers where these images were taken. Then again, in this case I think it's rather obvious, so I might want to turn off the identity plate altogether. Note that you do have controls for opacity and scale to affect how visible that identity plate is and how large it appears. You can also specify that you want that identity plate to appear behind any images, so if the identity plate should happen to overlap with the images will be at the front. We can also turn on a watermark for the images if we'd like. This will place a watermark over each image in the slideshow. Once you've turned on this option, you can choose an existing watermark if you've created one, or choose Edit Watermarks to create your own customized watermark. For example, in this case, I'll choose the watermark I've created that just features my name with a copyright symbol, and as you can see, that will appear in the bottom left of each image. Next, you'll find the Rating Stars option. This will obviously cause the star rating that you've assigned to the image, if applicable, to appear on the image. With this option turned on, we can choose a color, set the opacity, as well as the scale for the star rating. Note that you can also drag this star rating around within your slideshow presentation to position it as desired. The star rating itself will be anchored either to the image, so in this case it's anchored to the top right corner of the image and will be inset a little bit from that corner, or it can be anchored to the overall layout for your slide, in which case it will appear in the same position regardless of where the image is laid out. In this case, I'll keep it attached to the image itself. The final settings in the Overlays pane relate to text overlays. With this option turned on, any text overlays you've added will be set to a particular color, opacity, font, and font face. In order to actually put these settings to use, you need to create a text overlay. In this case, there already happens to be a text overlay added to the image, but we can adjust the settings for that text overlay or create our own text overlay. Without any text overlay selected, which you can accomplish just by clicking in an empty area of your slideshow, you can click the ABC button to add text to the slide. You can type custom text, for example, I might type Paris here, or you can choose the pop-up to edit the settings for this text to be included. You can then specify a structure for the text you want to include. For example, I'll delete the existing text and I can insert various options. For example, I might insert the file name, among other information contained within the metadata for the images. I'll then click Done to apply that change. Note that I can drag my text around the image, just as we saw with star ratings, to specify where I would like it to appear. This option is useful for including metadata about your images as part of the slideshow. In this case, I'm simply going to turn off the text overlays. Scrolling down on the right panel, we come to the Backdrop pane. This allows us to assign a color wash to the image, which is the gradient effect that you're seeing in the background. I can choose which color I'd like to use. To make it a little more obvious, I'll choose a shade of gray so that you can see the effect more clearly in the image. Note that the gray is transitioning from the actual background color, which we'll see in a moment, to red in the top right corner. I can adjust the opacity for this color wash and also the angle of the gradient. The background image option, as the name implies, allows you to place a background image behind the images in your slideshow. When you turn this option on, you can drag an image from the film strip into the placeholder for the background image. So for example, I'll go down to the film strip and grab an image that I think might be appropriate as the background. At the moment, I actually have all of the images selected, so first I'll click away from the images and then click on just the image that I want to include as the background. I can then drag that image into the placeholder so it becomes my background. To make it a little more obvious, I'm going to switch back to one of the other images in the slideshow. You can now see that I have a color wash gradient over a background image. We can adjust the opacity for this background image with the control found in the backdrop pane. It's generally best to avoid using a background image, but when you do, it should probably only be a texture that won't compete with the images you're presenting. In this case, I'll certainly turn off that option. The last option in the backdrop pane is the background color. With this option turned off, the background will simply be black. Of course, in this case, I have a color wash overlaid on top of the background, but I can turn on background color and then specify the color that I would like to use for that background. In this case, I've made a little bit of a mess of things here, so I'll simply turn off the color wash option to get back to a neutral gray background. Scrolling down again, we get to the titles pane, and this allows us to insert a title at the beginning and the end of our slideshow. I'll turn on intro screen, and the options are to use the identity plate or simply a color. For example, if I turn off identity plate, I can then choose a color and only the color will be displayed as an opening screen. But with identity plate on, I can either choose one of my existing identity plates or edit to create a custom title for the slideshow. For example, in this case, I would use the stylized text and just call it something like Paris. I can change all the font attributes as desired and then click OK. If I'm using an existing identity plate, I can also override the color of the text by turning on the Override Color checkbox and selecting the desired color from the pop-up. And of course, I can fine-tune the scale of that identity plate used in the intro screen. Similarly, we have the option for an ending screen, which will naturally be a slide placed at the end of our show. The same options apply here as for the intro screen. We can also include music as part of our slideshow. In the playback pane, the first option relates to a soundtrack. We can turn on the soundtrack to enable music and then click the Select Music button to bring up a dialog where we can choose the audio file we'd like to use as the soundtrack. Notice once we've added a soundtrack, we have a Fit to Music button that allows us to adjust the length of our slideshow by changing the duration of each individual image so that it exactly matches the length of the song we're using. Next, we can specify which playback screen to use if we have more than one display configured. In this case, my primary monitor is being used as the playback screen. I would use this option if I wanted to show the slideshow on a different display, for example, a digital projector. If you're working with multiple monitors and presenting to a small audience in that context, you may want to turn on the Blank Other Screens option so that any other displays will be black when the slideshow is being presented. As I mentioned, we can use the Fit to Music option if there is music that we've added to our slideshow in order to automatically adjust the slide duration. We can also adjust those settings manually. If we turn off the slide duration checkbox, then we can only navigate among the slides by pressing the arrow keys on the keyboard during slide playback. With this option turned on, the slides will advance automatically. You can specify how long each image should appear, as well as how long the transition between images should be. You can also specify a color to be used during the transition. Finally, we have a few checkboxes that relate to the playback of the images. Random order, as you can well imagine, will cause the images you've selected for this slideshow to be presented in a random order. Repeat will cause the entire slideshow to repeat continually until you press Escape to stop the slideshow. The last checkbox is Prepare Previews in Advance. With this option turned on, when you play the slideshow, it probably won't start immediately. Instead, Lightroom will generate previews for all of the images contained within the slideshow. This can create a slight pause when you play back the slideshow, but it helps ensure that the slideshow plays back smoothly. I recommend leaving this option turned on, and then as soon as you click play, you can press the spacebar to pause the slideshow until you're actually ready to present it. Once you've configured the slideshow to your liking, you'll probably want to save that as a user template so that you can easily use that layout in the future. So I've brought back the left panel and I'll click the plus button associated with the template browser. I can then type a new name. For example, I'll just call that My Slideshow Format, and click Create. That template will then be saved in the User Templates section by default. As you can see, while Lightroom provides a good amount of flexibility in configuring your slideshow, the controls are quite straightforward and easy to understand. And once you've saved the template for the slideshow layout, you can produce additional slideshows with different images using that same template in no time at all. The notion of creating and then playing a slideshow is pretty straightforward, but there are actually several ways you can share your photo slideshow using Lightroom. In this lesson, we'll take a look at the playback and export options for the slideshow module. I've already created a slideshow here that contains a collection of images captured in Paris and with settings that I feel are appropriate for the slideshow presentation I'm going to give. The first option for playing back the slideshow is to preview it right here while I'm working. I can preview the slideshow by clicking the Preview button at the bottom of the right panel in the slideshow module, or by clicking the Play button on the toolbar below the preview area. It might seem duplicative to have two controls that do the same thing right here in the slideshow module, but keep in mind that at times you might want to hide the panels so that you would use the toolbar instead of the right panel to preview your slideshow. The point is that you have a couple options in this particular case. Once you click the Preview button or the Play button, the slideshow will begin playing in the preview area, starting with the currently selected image. So if you want to start the slideshow from the beginning, you'll need to first click the first image on the film strip. Then click Play or Preview and the slideshow will begin. At any time during playback, you can click the Pause button to pause playback. You can also advance manually to the next slide by clicking the Next button, or go back to the previous slide by clicking the Previous button. The slideshow will continue to play. Going to the previous or next slide does not pause the slideshow, but merely sets it forward or back depending on which button you've clicked. At any time when you're finished playing your slideshow, you can simply click the Stop button to exit the preview mode. You might feel like you want to hide all of the panels and maybe even go into full screen mode when previewing your slideshow in order to get the best sense of what the final result will look like. However, instead of using preview mode in that case, you can simply click the Play button. This is the same button that you would use to play the slideshow back in front of an audience. Click the Play button and Lightroom will render the slideshow and begin the show. Notice, however, that it still starts with the image that was currently selected in the film strip. In this case, to stop the slideshow playback, I'll need to press the Escape key. I can then go back to the film strip and click Play to start the slideshow from the beginning. You can also press the spacebar key to pause the slideshow at any time. This is particularly helpful to pause the slideshow playback on the opening slide before you begin the actual presentation. Pressing spacebar one more time will resume playback of the slideshow. And once again, you can press Escape to stop the playback at any time. There are also two options for exporting your slideshow into a separate file that you can send to others via email, the web, or other means. The first is the ability to export to a PDF. On the left panel in the slideshow module, you'll find the Export PDF button. Simply click this button to bring up the Export Slideshow to PDF dialog. You can then select the folder that you want to save the slideshow in and enter a file name. For example, I'll just call this one Paris since it's a slideshow that contains images from Paris. The file type will automatically be set to PDF, and then you can simply specify the quality setting for the images, the height and width as appropriate, and whether or not you want the PDF to automatically open into full screen mode. There's also a pop-up that allows you to choose common screen sizes. So if you're going to be sharing this PDF slideshow with someone who will use it on a digital projector display, you could, for example, choose 1024 by 768 from the pop-up. When you've established your settings as desired, simply click the Save button and the PDF will be generated. You can send that PDF to anyone, and as long as they have the Adobe Reader installed, they'll be able to open it and play your slideshow. Keep in mind that music is not supported in the PDF slideshows. The other option for exporting your slideshow is to export as a video. To create a video file, simply click the Export Video button at the bottom of the left panel. This will bring up the Export Slideshow to Video dialog, which is quite similar, although even simpler, than the Export Slideshow to PDF dialog. Once again, you would navigate to the folder where you want to save your slideshow and then provide a file name for the slideshow. The file type will be set to an MP4 video file, which is your only option. You can then choose a video preset, which determines the dimensions of the video. The key question here is how large you want this video to be. If you're going to be sharing this video on the web, then you probably want to use one of the smaller dimensions so that the file size will be minimized. If you'll be running the slideshow directly on a computer or putting it on a DVD, where file size is not as critical, you can choose one of the larger settings. Once you've established these basic settings, simply click the Save button. The video file will then be rendered, and you can share your slideshow via that video file with just about anyone. The method of sharing your slideshow depends in large part on the context of the presentation. Fortunately, Lightroom provides several options for presenting your slideshow, allowing you to choose the option that makes the most sense for your particular circumstances.